Pilar. Okay, thank you, Pilar, for this kind presentation. As I said, yes, I'm going to be talking about qualitative research methods. I'm going to be talking about focus groups and interviews. And it's the first time I talk about it. I'm not an expert. I've learned by doing interviews, focus groups, and reading. So basically, what I want to do is share what we've learned doing projects regarding focus groups and interviews. As you know, when you do your research, and I understand many of you are PhD candidates, you may want to put the focus on different aspects of your research. So there is this book about Saldana and O'Brien that says that we can focus on the product, we can focus on the process, we can focus on the participants, or we can focus on the context. Okay, someone, just one person, okay? You unmute yourself. Is someone doing research on a product? Can you unmute yourself and in less than 30 seconds, let me know what you're doing? Anyone in the room? Come on. Otherwise it's gonna be boring, 2 hours talking, just me. Nobody's doing research on the product. Okay, let's give it a try, second try. The process, is someone analyzing the process or wants to analyze or intends to analyze?
Yes.
Okay, what are you doing?
I work in linguistics with oral narratives, and I want to understand how they create this kind of narratives and why they say what they want to say.
Okay, so you are focusing on this process of creating the narratives. Participants, is someone putting the focus on the participants and who the participants are for you? Just one person, unmute yourself. Maybe you want to say your name, and just in less than 30 seconds, you can tell us about it. Come on, I'm sure there are many people doing research with users. Okay, no luck. I think I will change the focus of my presentation. Last try, context-oriented. Someone focusing on the context. Okay, let me put examples then. For instance, when you focus on the product, maybe some of you are analyzing audio descriptions once they have been produced. Maybe you're analyzing subtitles, other access services, then you put the focus on the product. The process, imagine you want to analyze how an audio describer creates an audio description, or maybe you want to analyze how a post-edits machine translation output. You focus on this process of translation. Participants, there are different participants, there are different users, but media accessibility research very often has put the emphasis, especially lately, on reception research with users. So the people using, consuming, enjoying the audio descriptions, the subtitles, the sign language interpreter are asked, are tested, so the focus is put on them. And there are also what could be case studies, context-oriented research, in which you analyze the context. I would say that in media accessibility research, we very often follow this slogan that you've heard repeatedly, which is nothing about us without us. So we want to involve the participants and the users, the people who will enjoy the content with the access services are put at the center of any design and research process. Okay, I'm not saying that this is the only thing we do, but I think that this is one of the main features. When you do your research, there are different ways, and I'm not going to get into details. You can have more quantitative research, more, and I never know how to pronounce this word, qualitative or qualitative, whatever, however you pronounce that, or you can have mixed methods in which you use both types of research, and you do that thing with, you know, the magic word, triangulate the results. You analyze results obtained through different methods so that your conclusions are stronger. This summer school is putting the emphasis on eye tracking. I'm not going to be talking about eye tracking. You've got experts in this summer school. There are other methods. For instance, in one of our projects, the NIA projects, what we did was analyze the electrodermal activity or galvanic skin response, and the heart rate. And this, we did that to analyze the emotional activation of participants. So for instance, we wanted to know, I'll just put an example, what strategy would have a stronger emotional impact on the participants. So we had two, in audio subtitling, okay? So we had two excerpts. In one, the audio subtitles, so the subtitles read aloud, were voiced with a flat intonation, like a documentary. And in the other example, they were voiced like in dubbing, okay? So more acted. And then we designed an experiment, and using these tools, electrodermal activity, so the galvanic skin response, the sweating that is measured through sensors on the fingers, and the heart rate, we could see what strategy elicited an emotional response, okay? There are other tools that you can use, keystroke logging. I'm sure you are familiar with that. This tool, for instance, input log, but there are others. They allow you to see what the user writes down on the keyboard, the pauses, which sometimes are seen as indicators of cognitive effort, the time spent doing an activity, the time spent writing, the time spent searching on the internet. So you can imagine that this is very useful when you want to do research about the process, for instance, of translation or post-editing. But there are other methods. You can do analyze the discourse, okay? But you can also have interviews, focus groups, and questionnaires. And today, my presentation, which I will turn into a standard lecture after, you know, the lack of reaction at the beginning, will be centered on focus groups, on interviews. And I will be explaining that instead of reproducing a book, which you can read, I will try to refer to a project. Actually, I will talk about 3 projects, but mainly about one, where people are at the center. And I will tell you how we have designed the interviews and the focus groups within the context of the whole methodology of these projects. It will be more practical because I think then you can reproduce maybe what I will be telling you about in your own projects, maybe at a smaller scale. However, if you want to read about it, if you want to know more, if you want to know where I got inspiration, because what I'm telling you is not something that I just made up, I read about it, I would advise the book, Research Methodologies in Translation Studies, if your approach is more centered on translations. Oh no, you won't see that. You've got the references there. And this is a general introduction about research methodologies. If you are not so focused on translation studies and your approach maybe is broader, there is a book I also use sometimes in my courses on methodology, which is Scientific Methods for the Humanities, published by John Benjamins. More recently, I was familiar with this book, Creative Research Methods in the Social Sciences by Helen Cara. This is a book published in 2015, and it addresses new ways of doing research. So sometimes standard interviews or standard questionnaires will not work for certain user groups. I will get back to this later on. So maybe you have to be creative and adopt new approaches. So this is, I think it's quite interesting, this book, to see a new approach to research methods in the social sciences. That said, Alan Bryman's book on social research methods, for me, it's been a basic reference for many years now. And I think it's an excellent book if you want to know about it, about different methods. Actually, many of the things that I will be telling you about about interviews and about focus groups are based on what Alan Bryman says. And then I put there a couple of books in case you are interested in user experience, quality of experience, such as Observing the User Experience by Elizabeth Goodman, Koniapski, and Muet, and measuring the user experience. There are more, but at least these two have been useful for me. So, well, if you are doing your PhD and are interested in these topics, I think these are good references. And in any case, what I will be telling you about is considerably based on what these books explain. So let's start. As I said, I will be using one example, one project as an example, and this project is traction. I would like you to think, okay, Anna is talking about this project, how the methodology has been designed, but okay, let's make a parallelism with what you want to do. You may want to think, okay, how this could be applied to my doctoral research, okay? So this project is about opera co-creation, meaning the creation of opera in which professional artists and non-professional artists are involved. So it's closely related to what's called participatory art or community art. The aim of this project is to empower 3 communities. I will tell you about those communities in a second. They are based in Barcelona, in Portugal, and in Ireland. And, you know, start this co-creation process using technologies. What technologies are used? The technologies that are being used is co-creation space. And co-creation space is a tool that allows you to communicate with the other artists, both professionals and non-professionals, while you are creating the opera. So you may want to share excerpts or videos or images, you want to comment, etc. And then there is another technology, which is the co-creation stage, which is used on stage to do hybrid performances. So maybe you have someone in another room or in another place, and you integrate that in the performance. What is the ultimate aim of this project? And please bear with me, I know this is not directly to what you do, but you will see why I'm explaining this. The ultimate aim of this project is to produce a change, produce, we say a social transformation. I don't know if this is very ambitious, but this process produces a change on the person, maybe on the institution, etc. If you want to know more about this project, the website is on the screen, www.traction/project.eu/. This is a European project, so it's built on different blocks. I will not get into detail. There is a block that takes care of management, what we call work packages, one block that develops the technology, one block which is focused on doing this co-creation in the different places, so what we call the trials, one block which is evaluation, which is what I will be talking about today, and one block which is dissemination. So in 30 seconds, I've told you about the European project and how this is built. Then evaluation is what we are dealing with at UAB and what we had to design. And evaluation is also built on different blocks. First of all, we needed an overall evaluation methodology, how the evaluation will take place along this project. And you may think, okay, if you're doing a PhD, you also need an overall evaluation. You need to make some decisions, okay? And in our case, then, there were specific aspects that we wanted to evaluate. The technologies, this is one block. The process of co-creation, that's another block. The performance, so the final opera that will be produced after this co-creation process. And then we wanted also to measure, we want to measure or assess the social transformation impact, this social change that we hope to produce. What I think may be interesting for you is to see how we have designed the global methodology. And I think this is relevant because most probably you can think, you know, you can apply this to your project. So at the beginning of the project, we had to decide what we would like to assess, where this evaluation would take place, with whom, so the participants, the users that would be involved, how is more related to the methods, the specific methods, the tools that we would be using. And as you can imagine, we will be using a lot of focus groups and interviews. This is why I'm presenting this project. And when. So I think that less is more. Let's keep it simple. Sometimes we complicate things a lot. It doesn't need to be that much complicated. I think there are a very basic, there is a list, sorry, of very basic questions that we should ask ourselves and then start building this evaluation plan. So the first question we ask ourselves is what we want to evaluate. And of course, this was very much related to what the project aims to study. In this case, we want to evaluate the tools, the technology. So if we develop, as I mentioned before, a tool called co-creation stage or a tool called co-creation stage, we want to develop them, we want to design them adopting a user-centric methodology. And what does it mean? That means talking to the users from the very beginning so they can tell us what their needs are. And then when we develop tools, go back to the users and test these tools with them in an iterative process. So in different times during the project. And this is what we've been doing. Actually, one colleague, one partner, CWI, has been doing that. They have been doing focus group with users. They have been doing co-design sessions, etc., to develop the technology. So I think it's very important to understand that it's not that, okay, this is the technology, let us know what you think. It's, okay, let's co-create, let's co-design this technology and gather user requirements from the very beginning. Another thing, another aspect, another block that we want to analyze, so another part of this what, is the actual co-creation process. It says on slide training. Actually, we realize at the end that training, there won't be training in interaction, but in the process, participants in the co-creation process learn. So there is an informal learning taking place there. Okay, so this is another thing we wanted to assess, how the co-creation process, how all these, you know, there are workshop sessions in which professionals and non-professionals meet. How is it going? How can we evaluate this? So we wanted to evaluate this, the process. And then the third block was the performances. Okay, at the end of the process, there will be a performance or maybe a capsule, a short artistic product. How do we want to evaluate that, sorry. And then the change that all these process and product and the use of technology may produce. So the first question, the what we want to evaluate, was answered with these four blocks that I've mentioned and that you have on screen. Where? That's the second question we have to ask ourselves. Where is this gonna happen? In this case, the traction project is happening in 3 different places. First of all, it's happening at Liceu Opera House in Barcelona. And in this case, they are co-creating with persons, with neighbors from the Raval neighborhood. For instance, they want to co-create the visual identity, the poster, the opera poster, with persons from senior occupational center and also from an art school in the Raval neighborhood. Okay, so this is one of the places that this will take place, that the project will take place. One of the trials will be Barcelona. The second one is in Portugal, in Leiria, in a prison. SAM is a music school in Leiria. And what they are doing is they are co-creating an opera with inmates from a prison in Leiria. They are experiencing that, and actually they've been doing all this co-creation process for a year now, They even had like a first performance. And this is another of the trials where this will take place, Portugal. And finally, we've got Ireland, in which the Irish National Opera will co-create an opera in VR, virtual reality, with different communities across Ireland. So in Tallaght, close to Dublin, with young people from music generation, people from islands, etc. So as you can see, the second question, where, is very relevant. We need to know where things are going to happen because there may be specificities. In this case, as you can see, the three trials are very different, although they have a shared vision. With whom? When you do your research, you want to ask yourselves, who you are gonna involve, okay? Who your users will be, what their profile is. In this case, in a big project, at the beginning, we had discussions on who the participants, who the users in the traction research activities and co-creation activities would be. So in this case, and this is just an example so that you see the thinking process that you need to do. No? In this case, we saw that there were professionals and non-professional artists, the ones co-creating, but there would be also audiences, and there would be other people involved from the, I don't know, the guards from the prison, for instance, or the psychologist, or maybe traction-related professionals, etc. And we classified them. Having this overall picture of who the users or who the participants are helps you later on when you have to design your focus groups and interviews, because there you will have to decide who you're going to interview, who's going to be on your focus group. And unless you have a clear idea of who is involved in the project and how these users are categorized, it may be challenging, okay? Especially if you're working with, in this case, it's a big project with different partners, different trials. Unless there is a shared understanding of who the users are, it's going to be really, really difficult to be consistent in the research. So we've talked about the what, we've talked about the where, we've talked about the who, and now I'm going to talk about the how. There are different aspects to the how question. The first one is ethical aspects. Whenever you do research, you need to follow ethical procedures. I'm sure this has been mentioned in relation to iTrack, or I mentioned this in relation to any type of research. When you involve people in your research, first of all, you need to submit an application to an ethical committee. For instance, at my university, we've got an ethical committee to say who you're going to be involved, what information you're going to give them, etc., how you're going to manage the data, because we are gathering data from persons and we have to be very respectful. So you need to consider all the ethical aspects, send an application to an ethical committee, and have your research approved. Please don't start doing any research with users until you've got ethical clearance, because I think that as researchers, we need to follow a code of conduct and follow these ethical procedures. Then probably, if you follow these ethical procedures, when you do any research, you will have to inform the participants. And to inform the participants, you will probably have a written document, which is the information sheet that the ethical committee has approved. And also, you need to give them a document and ask them for their explicit consent, not implicit, explicit consent, that they want to take part in that research, that their participation is voluntary, that they can live, the interview, for instance, and don't explain why and with no consequences, all these things which are important. So they need to get all the information and they need to consent to it. Normally, this is done with a written piece of paper, but sometimes it's done online. What's important is that the person understands what he or she is signing. So for instance, in one of our projects, we had persons with cognitive disabilities. So what we did was developed a very easy to understand consent form. We simplified it and we got it approved by the ethical committee. Because the reason why we do that is that everybody needs to understand what they're signing to. For instance, in another project, we had participants who were blind. So in this case, we decided to provide an alternative audio consent form. So we recorded that. Maybe we could have used a digital one. So take into account the specificity of your users and make sure that they understand and that they have access to these informed consents. It's not just an administrative thing that you have to do. It's a very important and central aspect of research. Also, if you intend to record them and publish pictures, of course, you have to take care of the visual rights, and you have to protect the data. If you say that data will be anonymous and confidential, you need to make sure that this is the case. Okay, so I'm not going to be teaching a course on ethical aspects, but I think it is really, really important that you take this into account. And it's not only people doing, studies in genetics that need to do that. We in the social sciences and humanities also need to follow ethical procedures. How? There are many questions apart from the ethics when you design your study. You need to decide what method you're going to be using. Are you going to be doing a focus group? Are you going to be doing an interview, usability studies, maybe expert evaluation? Maybe you're going to be using physiological sensors, participant observation. These were all the things that in the Traction project came up as possibilities. Okay, so we did the brainstorming among partners, and these were the things that that were mentioned. Since I said before that there are different trials, remember, there are different blocks, different things that we want to analyze, and we are many people. So what you need when you do such a project, and I would say that when you do that individually, it's also good to plan it, is to have very clear, have a very clear idea of how you're gonna be planning and how you're gonna be reporting your evaluation activities. So in the Traction project, we decided that whenever if one partner wants to do an evaluation activity, okay, they need to produce always a plan, a protocol. So we need to know what the aim of an evaluation activity is, who the participants will be, how they will be recruited, how they will be contacted, what the timeline is for this specific evaluation activity, where it will take place. Will it be online, face-to-face? If face-to-face, where? If online, what system? In what language? This is something that very often is forgotten, especially in international projects. Some people tend to think that all the research will happen in English. This is not the case. So we need to consider the language of the participants and how we will address these aspects. The materials needed for that specific evaluation activity. If you need to do any preparatory tasks, so before that activity, do you need to ask your participants to do something? Or do you need to prepare for something? Then who's the responsible for that evaluation action? Especially in a big project, you need to have one person who follows all these up. And then when you plan, you need to have a step-by-step process description. I will show you examples of how we did that how we did this planning for the focus groups and interview, but this is applicable to any evaluation activity. And also any evaluation activity needs to produce a report in the context of Traction. And I would advise you to do it in the context of any project, because then, after 2 or 3 years, it's a good way to gather all the information So normally in a report, you would expect to have information about the aim of that specific evaluation activity, the date, when it happened and where, the place, the number of participants that were involved, who was the responsible, and probably you would expect, this is what we needed in Traction, a summary of the participant profile, the main findings of this evaluation activity, and if relevant, the researchers' observations. So this was the general framework for all the evaluation activities in a 3-year European project in Traction. We decided that focus groups and interviews would be a central element of our research. We wanted to talk to the people and get their views. And these focus groups and these interviews are happening across the trials in different languages. And we wanted to involve the researchers from the different trials in doing this interview. So a necessary first step was to have a shared understanding of what a focus group or an interview is and how we would be developing them. So we had to train the researchers in a way so that we would be consistent in our approach. And what I'm gonna do now in the next half an hour is explain you the focus group protocol and the interview protocol that we designed for Traction, because I think this can be useful for you if you need to design such a protocol. But before proceeding, since I don't know if I'm talking to someone, are there any questions from anyone? Just unmute yourself. And if something was not clear, you let me know. If not, I will continue with my presentation. Okay. I'll wait 5 seconds. If not, I will move. Yeah.
I'm just hello.
Hello.
Yeah, I'm just bothered about number of participants, like simple number of participants or simple for a study, extended simple. So that is a simple size. Yeah, for an experiment. Choose it. Yeah.
Yeah. The sample size. We'll talk about this in a minute. But definitely, when I said the participants here, when you plan, definitely this is a very important aspect to decide who your participants will be and how many you will involve. Okay, and this is highly dependent on your research, but I will refer to this when I describe the focus groups. Yeah.
So thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Okay, so as I said, we developed a focus group, and I put there literally some of the content of the instructions we shared with our participants. I will read some of it, but not all of it literally, but you have it for reference at least. This is more text than I usually put on my slides, but I thought that it would be good for you to have it after my presentation. So the idea is that the focus group is actually a form of group interview. You have several participants, apart from what some people call a moderator, others call a facilitator. But the emphasis is on a specific topic generally. And the idea is that let's see how all the group agrees or disagrees on a certain topic. So there is this concept of the joint construction of meaning that Breiman, which I mentioned before, refers to. Focus groups are run by a moderator, as I said before. We can also call them facilitators, and I think it's a very important role because a moderator needs to guide the session, but not be too intrusive. If a moderator starts expressing his or her opinions, that's not the point. The point is that you guide the session, that you get as much information as you can, you get the participants speaking, but you don't interfere, you don't express your opinion, okay? And this is something which sometimes is difficult because we are all passionate about the topic we are researching, and we tend to express our views. But if we express our views, we are already conditioning what the participants will say. So I think this idea of guiding without being intrusive is an important one. In Traction, we decided that there would be a moderator and an assistant. And we put the emphasis on the fact that the moderator should ensure that every member of the focus group contributes equally to the discussion and prevents some participants from dominating the conversation. If you are experiencing focus group, or if you have participated in one, this is a risk. Sometimes it may be difficult to get people to talk, but sometimes you may have one participant who talks all the time and who's, dominating all the conversation. So here the moderator has this role of very politely, trying to balance all the contributions, trying to get the other participants to contribute and to express their opinions, because otherwise it's like an individual interview. It doesn't make sense. Okay, so I think that this is one of the difficult and challenging things and important ones. How many participants? Normally, focus groups can range between 4 and 10 participants, depending on the type of activity. If you are interested in this sample size of focus groups, I would refer you to the book by Alan Bryman, Social Research Methods. There is a page which I thought I had written down, but I haven't. But anyway, if you go to that book, he does a comparison of a wide range of studies in which focus groups have been used, and he indicates how many participants there were in each of these focus groups. So this can give you an idea of how many you need, how many participants and how many focus groups. But according to him, this ranges between 4 and 10. In Traction, what we did, we aim to include 4 to 6 participants per focus group. To get those numbers, we invited 6 to 7. Why? Because it always happens that people don't show up, either because finally they decide not to take place, because they're ill, because they've got work. Things happen always. So take into account this no-show, okay? And normally, in the case of Traction, we expected focus groups to last about 1 hour, maybe longer, but normally would be around 1 hour. I don't have, and maybe this replies to Robert's question, a magical answer, okay? I don't have a magical answer of how many focus groups, how many people, not even how many interviews and how many people. I think this is highly dependent on your research. So see what similar studies have done, refer to these books I was mentioning, and then maybe you will have a reply. I think you won't get from me a magical number today, okay? The format, normally we try to do that face-to-face, but coronavirus changed our lives, and online focus groups are also providing valuable and useful data. Actually, some people feel, more comfortable online, but again, you need to know how to manage an online system. You need to create a good atmosphere so that people take part. In any case, you need to make this decision. Will it be face-to-face or online? And for instance, if it's face-to-face, it's very important that you know the room where this will take place, because you need participants to feel comfortable. You need to know how the room will be arranged, for instance, in a circle, so that they all see each other. This may seem stupid, but sometimes you plan a focus group in a room where the tables cannot be moved, and then it's challenging to be comfortable there, okay? Or there is a lot of noise. So take your time to find a suitable place for the focus group. And online, also take your time to make sure that there are no technical problems. In Traction, we prioritize face-to-face, but then because of the situation, many of them are happening online. Transcription and recording. If we do a focus group for an interview, is because then afterwards we'll be analyzing it qualitatively. So the session is good to record them, and to do that, of course, you need the explicit consent. This needs to be explicitly mentioned and subsequently transcribed. Another option is that an assistant takes notes during the session. So there is someone on a computer and then taking notes on what is being said. In any case, you need explicit consent for whatever data you collect. And if you say that this data will be anonymous, you need to make sure that it is anonymous, it is confidential. In Traction, in the first focus group, what we decided is to have a note taker. So someone would be in the room taking notes. And this person worked at the same time on a summary of the main aspects that were discussed, on the main points of agreement, so that at the end, we could provide with participants with a maximum of a one-page summary of what was discussed and agreed, and they would be validating it, they would be accepting it. This worked very well because at the end of the sessions, we had a one-page summary to which all participants are agreed. But to do that, you need a note taker that is skillful enough to take the notes, or maybe you can have two persons, and at the same time write this summary, know what the main aspects are, and be able to produce this summary on the spot. As I said, for Traction, it worked very well. In Traction, for the focus group, we had this protocol. Before the focus group, you need to decide the goal, who will participate and how many people should be included in each focus group, how you will contact the participants by email, through associations, etc. The timeline, when the focus group will take place and when the materials should be ready, where the focus group will take place, and what language the activity will take place, and whether translation support will be included. This is the same I was telling you about at the beginning. I said any evaluation activity needs to consider this. Then in the focus group, this is the specific protocol. What materials you need to have ready for the focus group. You need to know if any preparatory actions are needed. Are you going to ask something to your participants before the focus group? Actually, I would keep this to a minimum and or not do it directly because we are already asking a lot of people who voluntarily join focus groups. You need guiding questions, what questions and activities you will be doing during the session. And then we asked, of course, the responsible for the focus group to put all this information on a document. Okay, so you've got this information ready. You go to the focus group, and then we said, okay, in any focus group interaction, and this is something that you can do in your focus group, the moderator introduces himself or herself and thanks the participant, briefly explains the project, the goal, and the procedure, and then deals with all the ethical forms. Remember, I put the emphasis on ethics. In this case, we give them an information sheet, a consent form, and we explain how the data will be collected and how the data will be used. People need to have information before consenting to take part in a focus group. They are then asked to read the form, to sign it, and this form is, as I said before, in an accessible format and language. And then, in the case of Traction, participants are asked to fill in a demographic questionnaire. So we created a short demographic questionnaire to be used in all the project, and any participant taking part in any evaluation action fills in this demographic questionnaire. I'm not gonna talk much about demographic questionnaires, but I would give you an advice. Just think, is this question I'm asking necessary or not? Is it necessary to ask if it's a male or a female participant? Are we going to do this binary proposal? Are we going to use, other options? Is it worth asking about age? For my research purposes, that's a question. Is it worth asking about disability? So just ask yourself, do I need to ask this? And then make sure it makes sense in the context of the research and that you ask it in a respectful way. For instance, in traction at the beginning, we decided to ask about ethnicity because we consider that this would be, would show us how people from diverse origins were contributing to the project. We had, in one of the countries, it was not possible to ask about this because it's a very sensitive issue. In the others, we were not sure whether to use, different categories, and we decided to use an open field. But then what we realized after we did the first round of user evaluations is that the results were not relevant. The answers were so mixed, people understood different things about ethnicity, that this data was not useful. So what we've decided is not to ask this question, okay? So just think really thoroughly what you want to ask. Okay, I'm going back to the focus group. We are in the focus group. All these initial steps have been taken. Okay, sorry. This is what I was mentioning about the demographics, okay? So just ask if the questions, if they are relevant, give options to the participants. We did that at the beginning, but you may consider to ask these questions at the end when people feel more comfortable, and be very careful with personal data so that you comply with legislation. So, okay, all these first steps are taken and the focus group starts. Would be good so that participants introduce themselves, some ice-breaking activities. Moderator thanks the participants. Ask them to speak one at a time. If you are recording and everybody speaks at the same time, it will not be possible for you to analyze that. And it's very important to reassure people that there are no right and wrong questions or answers or opinions, that everyone's views are important. And it's good to stress that. And then basically as a moderator, you facilitate the discussion. You've got a set of topics or questions that guide you, okay? And basically you encourage the discussion and try to create a friendly atmosphere and not be, remain unobtrusive, as I said before. At the end, the moderator wraps up the discussion. And in our case, in Traction, what we did, as I mentioned, is come up with a list of conclusions. And we read them aloud to the participants. They made changes if necessary. And then at the end, they said, okay, this is what the main points we've discussed today. And that was very, very useful for the project. On screen, you've got a template for the focus group protocol, what I've already mentioned. And then a template for the report in which you have the general information, the participant profile, the approved conclusions, and the researchers' observations. I will now explain the interviews. Yeah, and then maybe we can take a short break if that's fine. As I said, we had to train the trainers, the researchers, we had to explain, we had to have a shared understanding of what an interview is. And I think this can also be useful to you. The first thing is whether you want to do an individual interview or a group interview. Then you may say, what's the difference between a focus group and a group interview? In Traction, at least, when we are doing focus group, is we want to understand the group interaction, that we agree, the joint, construction of meaning, as it's said here on the slide. An interview, a group interview, it's more broader topics, it's different views. We don't need to agree or disagree. No, it's the different people that are interviewed at the same time. The number of participants in a group interview is highly dependent on what you aim to achieve. you can have a structured interview or a standardized interview in which everything is exactly the same question, same phrasing, same order. It's like a questionnaire, okay? Very often there are a closed list of possible answers. So this is one way to do interviews. So everybody replies to the same interviews. It's, yeah, basically like a questionnaire. What works very well, at least this is what we're doing in Traction, is a semi-structured interview. So you've got a list of questions, you've got an interview schedule, but then you adapt them. You are flexible enough to change or to add questions in response to what they are answering, okay? So the questions are more open and you make the most of the interview. So if you're focusing on one aspect, but then another relevant aspect comes up and it's not there on your question, you're flexible enough to adapt and to ask that question, okay? So you've got a guiding, a guide, an interview schedule, but then you adapt. And then there is an unstructured interview in which there is not really a structure. You may have, yeah, also some guiding questions, but it's more informal. Everything is, you know, you change the order, doesn't matter. It's more like an informal conversation. Personally, what we are using is this semi-structured interview. So there is a clear plan, but then we are flexible enough to adapt if something relevant comes up. In Traction, the interviews can be face-to-face, on the phone, video conferencing, etc. In our case, we are prioritizing face-to-face, but again, due to the COVID-19 situation, some of them may be taking place online where necessary. And normally there is one interviewer, but if necessary, we may have two. How do we decide? You need to know who you're going to interview, what will make them more comfortable. And for each situation, we decide. Having two interviewers may help, you know, if you get lost or you need support, you know, it's easier not to lose track, but maybe some people feel really intimidated if they have two people interviewing them. So you really need to assess the pros and cons and then make your final decision. Recording and creating a transcript, it's the same as I said before. In Traction, we are recording the interviews, we're transcribing them, and then we will be, because this will allow us to analyze it with a qualitative software I will be referring to in a while. Make sure that the place is comfortable, that if you want to record, the machine is recording, and make sure that the tools work, and just check that the length of the interview is adequate. If you're interviewing one person, maybe with 30 minutes is enough. You need to see in each situation what's needed. Before the interview, you may want to, you know, brief them on what the interview will be about. This is something for you to consider, but I would not advise you to overwhelm them with activities. I mean, it's enough that they're coming to the interview. Again, before the interview, plan what I've mentioned 1,000 times in this presentation: the goal, who's responsible, who will be interviewing, the type of interview, who the participants will be, and how you will be contacting them, and when the interviews will take in place, what materials you will need, the place, the language, the preparatory work, and this list of questions that you need to guide you during the session. In the interview schedule, as I said, you need to identify the topics you are interested in and formulate questions. It's very good to get external input. So once you have this interview schedule, why don't you do a pilot? Why don't you ask someone if they understand the same as you do when you ask these questions? Create an order. Okay, this is why it's semi-structured, but then be flexible. And try to formulate questions that do not trigger a yes or no answer. You don't want your participants saying yes, no, that's not useful. you need to come up with questions that will allow them to provide, more thorough responses. Do not ask questions that lead to the answer you want. And this is where we have to be very careful. And then be aware of the needs of participants. Some participants need more time to reply. They don't have a quick response. So take your time, manage silence, and avoid people feeling uncomfortable during the interview. You need to be a very good listener. Try to use a language that is easy to understand. When we are in a project, we use all this jargon all the people in the project know about. But maybe your participants, this is my alarm saying that I've been talking for an hour. So in a while, I will be stopping for a very short break. Try to use a language that is easy to understand. If needed, you may want to use, I don't know, images, prototypes, whatever. And be very familiar with the questions you want to ask so that you don't miss any important question. And as in the other cases, interaction, we fill a protocol and we write a report. And the development is quite similar to the focus group. We welcome the participants. We tell them why we want to interview them. We deal with ethical aspects. We've got the demographic form. You can read all this on screen later on. And then we start the interview. If it's a group interview, they present themselves. And again, we emphasize that there are no right and wrong opinions. We start the interview following the schedule, trying to engage the participant, remaining unintrusive as possible, and not leaving the interviews to the replies we want. And at the end, we thank them and we let them know where the information about the project is to be found. This is very important also. We very often ask people to take part in focus groups or interviews, but we need to remember, once all this has been processed, to go back to them and explain them the results, but maybe not in an academic format. We can, we need to publish papers, but maybe we can generate easy to understand summaries of the outcomes of our research so that people know how their interview or the focus group has helped us as researchers. And at the end of the interview, I would advise you to take a few notes, those things that are in your mind, how the session was developed, if anything, is interesting enough, just write a few notes on how the interview went. Interaction, we've got a protocol for the interview planning, the protocol on screen, and then the same for the report, where it's very, very similar to the focus group. And I think that if that's fine, it's a good moment now, because I'm halfway through my presentation. We can take a 5-minute very short break, so I can drink some water. You can also drink some water. And then in 5 minutes, we can continue. Is that fine, Chris and Agnieszka?
Yes, absolutely. 5 minutes break is always welcome.
Yes, perfect.
Okay.
Thanks a lot. I'll see you in 5 minutes then.
So in 5 minutes, we'll be back. Thank you. Okay.
Turn off. Oh.
Okay. So now I will explain. Remember the different blocks I mentioned that we're analyzing the technology, the performance, the co-creation process, etc. Now I will tell you exactly how we designed the assessment of the co-creation process, the co-creation of an opera with professional artists and non-professional artists. Of course, we first did a literature review, what you all do in your PhDs, and then we asked ourselves, okay, how are we going to assess co-creation? What are we going to ask when we have all these interviews? Because we decided to have interviews and focus groups. How will we analyze the data? And I think that by explaining you this very specific project, you may have, or this process, you may have ideas for your own research. So, how to assess co-creation? We decided that to identify the indicators the elements that would allow us to assess whether a co-creation process was successful or not, we should talk to people, we should talk to experts, we should talk to people who know about co-creation. So during the first year, we did interviews with what we call cultural stakeholders, asking them what co-creation was for them and how they would assess this process of co-creation and the output of the co-creation process. So what indicators they would be using, how to evaluate co-creation. From this, we analyzed these interviews and we came up with a list of indicators, things that would help us assess co-creation. For instance, I don't know, engagement, active participation, personal change. With this rough list of indicators, we hold a focus group within the project with experts from the different trials. And this helped us come up, and this is not on the graph I see now, I see it now, with a final list of indicators. Okay, so the interviews generated a list of indicators, the focus group generated the final list of indicators. So we know at this point what we want to look at, what elements will help us in the evaluation. And these elements are what we used to design questionnaires to be sent to the people taking part in the co-creation process. And also these indicators helped us design the interview schedule for the interviews to be happening. So for the first round of interviews, see that at the beginning when we talked to different people to see how they would assess co-creation, we created a protocol. This certainly rings a bell now, right? The goal was to define what is understood by co-creation and identify indicators to assess the co-creation process. We wanted to involve government representative, cultural stakeholders, and community representatives from the 3 trials, remember, Portugal, Barcelona, and Ireland, with a semi-structure interview, with people contacted with trial members in a certain time range, online, with different languages being involved. And for that, we needed to have the video conference system ready, interview schedule, consent forms, an email to involve them, etc., etc. So I'm not going to get into details about this, but that's wrong. Now, what I would like to draw your attention to, and there is a lot of text here, but I will explain it, is that we design an interview schedule collaboratively among all partners. It's not just me, okay, I'm going to come up with a list of questions. No, let's work on the questions. Let's see that we all agree on them. And the final list of questions is on the left. You don't even need to read those questions, but you see there is a lot of text. There are lots of questions. Then one of the partners said, okay, some of these questions may not be relevant for our participants who are people who've been involved in community operas, but are not are not government representatives or are not professional artists. And also they said the language on the left may be too challenging, too difficult for some of these persons who may not be native speakers of the language or who may not have a strong educational background. So what we did was we adapted the questions on the left to the questions on the right. I'm not even reading that, but just looking at the amount of text that you see on screen, you see how there was a simplification process. Actually, it may well be that the questions on the right may have worked better for all the participants. But what I'm trying to say here is know who your participants are. Okay, so following the process I've described, we did these interviews and we came up with a report, okay? And what we did was analyze the data. And at that stage, we used one software, okay? Now wake up because this is interesting. You may want to use that. This is a free software online, which is called Tagetti. It's really, really simple. And you can upload transcripts or documents and tag them using codes, okay? So instead of making your notes or highlighting on paper what is relevant from your interviews, this is a software we use to do this process online, collaboratively. Can you please mute yourself? Someone unmuted him or herself. Thank you. And basically in this software, you create, I'm not doing a live demo, I just took a few snapshots, but you can go online and then do it afterwards. It's really, really easy. You create a new project, you put a name, a description, and then basically what you do is you add documents. On screen on the left, it says add a document. You click on here and you upload documents. So on the left, you will have all the list of documents that you are going to analyze. So when you click add a document, this opens, you enter a document name in which you may want to use a code that helps you identify what that document refers to. I don't know, maybe you want to say, if it's from Portugal, it will be a P, from Ireland an I, from Barcelona a B, and then I put the date, and then, you know, you need to come up with your own coding. So here you upload the document, you can write a description and you import it in the system. Here, for instance, I made up one on the left. Now you see interviewee one, okay? When I want to start analyzing the data, I click on edit. You see interviewee one on the left and then edit. I click there and then the text opens. Here in this case, I just put a text, which is, this is the document I'm using to test Tagetti. I will be talking about Tagetti at the LeadMe Winter School. Actually, it's a summer school, but never mind, okay? In this case, for instance, I highlighted the LeadMe Winter School, and here I may want to add a new highlight, a new code. So for instance, maybe the code here is school or LeadMe, okay? So basically what you're doing, and I hope I'm explaining myself, is just select the segments you want to highlight and add a new highlight or a new code, or use an existing one to tag all your text. Okay, if you want, you can create, in this case, for instance, a new tag, which is LeadMe. I select LeadMe as the tag I want to use, and you see now that the text is highlighted. Okay. You do that with all your interviews, with all your content, and then you have a list of codes. Yeah, all the codes you've been using. If you go now on screen, I'm not on the tab that says documents, top left. I'm on a tab that says project info. And here on the project info below, you've got a button that says export codebook. If you click on here, you can download all the codes you've been using to tag that specific project, okay? There are different other functionalities. You can also manage collaborators. So in this case, for instance, we were two different researchers working on the same online from different places at the same time, because it has a web online collaborative free option, okay? And as I was saying, you can also export the project and export the codebook. So for instance, here on screen, you can see one codebook that I exported, in which the first column is the ID, the second column is the document reference, the column C is the tag, okay? So all the tags I was using, and then column D has all the content related to each of the tags. So in a way, afterwards, for instance, I want to look at audience attendance or audience response, which is one of the tags. I have all the content related to this topic, related to this tag, grouped, okay? So that then the analysis, when you want to create your narrative, is much simpler. There are other tools, I will mention another one later on, but this one, I came across this one, it's online, it's free, and it was very, very easy to use. Of course, then it does not have the, you know, many functionalities to visualize the data, but to start, it's good, rather than doing that on a Google Doc, for instance. Yeah. So as I was mentioning, we did all these interviews. We analyzed them with Tagetti, and we came up with a list of indicators. And with all this list of indicators, we did a focus group. Again, the plan is on screen. I'm not gonna get into many details. And at the end of this process, we came up, with a list of indicators that we would be using for the questionnaires and the interviews in year 2. I mentioned that at the beginning, but now here on screen, you've got the list of indicators. For me, it's not so important in this specific presentation what indicators we chose. For me, what's important is that you see how we did a bottom-up approach. So we talked to the people, we did interviews, and based on the analysis of the interviews, we identify a list of elements, of indicators that can help us in the evaluation process of the opera co-creation, okay? So then different workshops took place. We had co-creation workshops, we had performance also. And what we are doing at the end of each co-creation workshop is a questionnaire. So when you design a questionnaire, this session is not on questionnaires. I will just give 3 or 4, I will make 3 or 4 comments. The first thing you need to ask is what to ask, okay? Why do you want to ask that? Then what are you gonna ask? It's strictly related to your aim. And just ask what you need to ask. Otherwise, questionnaires are too long and people just stop replying to the questionnaire because it's boring, because it doesn't make sense. So the first thing is make sure that what you ask is needed for your research purposes. The second thing, so in the case of traction, what we asked was related to the indicators I've presented you. The second thing is how to ask it. We are so, immersed in the project. We use all this jargon, so we think that those questions are easy to understand, and they may not. So it's good that once you have agreed on a set of questions collaboratively with the project partners, okay, you involve external people who don't know about it, so that they can test and validate the questions. So in Traction, we did that in the different languages. We created a list of questions, but then, okay, involve people. And what does it mean for you, these questions? Do you understand what? And with this discussion, we improved the way the questions were written. We validated them. You need to think how to administer it. Maybe online it works, maybe you need paper. You need to cater for the needs of your participants. So if a participant has difficulties dealing with digital content, provide the paper, or maybe you may want to have someone assisting them. You need to consider all the situations. For instance, in SAMP in Portugal, remember that I talked about the 3 trials. In one of the trials, the people involved there said that the questionnaire would not work at all with inmates. When they see a form, you can imagine what, when they are requested to fill in forms. So fill another form for the project was not an option. So what we are doing now, and we are just deciding it now, is find more creative methods for this. So we have not decided yet, but maybe we'll do some workshop activities with inmates, or more visual information like drawing a scale on the floor or on a board. We need to think about these more creative methods. Remember the book I was referring to you at the beginning by Helen Cara? Find a creative method which is more suitable and which replaces this questionnaire, okay? So this is what we are doing now. Based on the questionnaires, based on the indicators, we are doing questionnaires or alternative methods. And also, we want to have interviews. Why? To have data from different sources. The questionnaire provides one type of data. The qualitative interviews, semi-structured interviews will also help us gather more data and cross all this data. So again, for the interviews, we are asking ourselves who to interview, how many people we can involve, what to ask, and how to coordinate the team. And here it's really important to find a balance between gathering relevant data, enough data, and not overwhelming the participants. If we have, I don't know, 15 people taking part in a co-creation workshop, and we ask all of them to fill in a questionnaire, to do 2 interviews, etc., they will leave all this process because it's too time-consuming, too demanding. So we need to strike a balance between what we need in terms of data and what is reasonable to ask all the participants, okay? As I mentioned before that at the beginning, we used Tagetti. Now for this second phase in which we will be doing interviews, they have not started yet. We've decided to move to Atlasti. This is not a free software, although there is a free license for a period of time, because we think it's more powerful for the analysis. I'm learning, so I'm here giving a talk, but I'm still learning how to use this software. But I've put some snapshots. The approach is quite similar to Tagetti, but of course it has more functionalities. There is a desktop version and there is a web version, which is the one we are using, so that different people in different places can work on the same project. So when I log in, then I select the web version. On screen, top left, it says Atlasti Web. Then I get into an interface and I select the project, in this case, Traction, screenshot at the middle of the slide. And then what I do is I start adding the documents, same process as in Tagetti, add document, screenshot top, bottom right on screen. So I upload Word and PDF files. One thing which is quite interesting is that I can select documents, one or more. On screen, I selected one, which is called test.doc, and I can add them to a group. The bottom black bar, which says add to group. So imagine here we'll have interviews from 3 different places: Portugal, Barcelona, Ireland, managed by different people, dealing with the co-creation process, but also the performance, with professional and non-professional artists. So there will be a wide variety of interviews. What we can do is, for each of the files, add some metadata, add to what groups they belong. So imagine I select this one that I've got on screen, test, and I say this belongs to the group Liceu, for instance, to the group non-professional artists, and to the group co-creation. For each of the documents, I assign this information so that at the end, when I want to analyze the data, I can retrieve the data that is relevant to a certain group or to more than one group, okay? So basically here you click on add to group and you select. Then you open the document, and what I'm showing on screen are snapshots from a sample offered by Atlasti. They are not mine. Then here, for instance, you can start selecting the excerpts and tagging them based, if you want, on a list of codes you have already uploaded before, okay? For instance, here there is a list of codes that has already been prepared. So you can, in Traction, what are we doing? We've uploaded all the codes that we obtained from the indicators. So it's already there, so that when the different people start coding, they just highlight the excerpt and select the code that is applicable. And then you've got a quotation manager in which you can select certain indicators and download all the excerpts, all the quotations related to that specific topic. Also, you can you can generate charts, you know, there are different functionalities. And if you download it and you use the desktop version, there are more possibilities. I still have to learn a lot about this, okay? So maybe there is someone in the room that has used it and can tell us about it, but it has a lot of potential. This is the one we are using, but there are other, you know, types of qualitative software. I'm sure you are familiar with NVivo, etc. So it's a bit up to you to start searching. I cannot advise you on using one or another. This is the one we are starting to use, and Tagetti is the one we used before, okay? And apart from the quotation manager, there is also a memo manager, and this is something I would advise you also to do. If you are different people, or even if you are on your own working on a project, you do one coding session, okay? You start analyzing your data. It's very good that at the end of each session, you write a short note, like a diary, okay? So for instance, in the traction project, whenever one of us finishes a coding session, we'll upload here where it says demo research diary, we'll upload a document with a date, okay? And our initials, of the initial of the researcher, and we'll just write down, okay, I text whatever, code it, no problems. Or maybe I want to make a note. This way, we keep track of all the sessions that we've developed. Also, what we always do is export the session, export it, put it a name we've agreed on a file name, and upload it on a shared folder in case one of us, you know, accidentally destroys something. We have backups outside the system. And this is what we are doing in Traction. This is the main example I wanted to give you. Maybe now we can open the floor for questions, and if not, what I have are two other examples, but maybe if there are any questions related to Traction or what I have explained, I can answer them now. And if not, I will move to the other examples. Cassia. Oh, hello, nice to see you.
Hi, it's good to see you, Anna. Great talk. You mentioned that the project is based in the 3 different countries. So I'm assuming you had a questionnaire in Spanish, Catalan, English, and Portuguese. Am I correct?
You are correct.
So here's my question. Did you translate and validate the questionnaire? And if so, what was your validation process?
What we did was a focus group with 3 persons in which we made sure that the translation, so let me explain better. The questions were translated by a professional translator, and then we had a session with 3 people not involved in the process, in the project, who validated, who confirmed that the meaning was what we were expecting. So this is what we did. We didn't complicate it even more. We know that there are, you know, more complex procedures, but this is what we did in the process, in the project. And of course, once the questions were agreed, we implemented them. For instance, in the questionnaire, we implemented them, and then we tested that everything worked.
Okay, yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome. Isa.
Hi, Anna.
Hello, nice to see you.
Nice to see you, and a great talk. While you were describing this Traction project, I just had an impression that you're gathering fantastic data that can be later processed with text analysis. So if you've got the transcripts of the interviews and you've got different focus groups or different participants, I thought it might be interesting and complementing what you're analyzing to analyze actually the text that participants provided. So for example, for emotional tone or their attitudes. And in our research, we were using the program, Linguistic Inquiry and Word Count program by Professor Pennebaker. And I posted a link to the program, also publication describing the program itself on the chat. So I think it might be, even if you're talking about qualitative data analysis, the material gathering, the text, the transcriptions or interviews or the content of focus groups can be later on treated as a material for quantitative data. So we will get percentage of emotional tone, like positive emotions, negative emotions. I know that there is an option in the program to add categories of your interest. So if there is some kind of a topic that is interesting for you, you may add keywords and then count how many related words were appearing in the transcript. So yeah, that's common.
That's a very good idea, Isa. I think that once you have a transcript, once you have this written content, there is so much you can do. I mean, even you can do a linguistic analysis of the language, etc. One thing I did not get into, and I'm not going to get into because I should have prepared, is how to transcribe all that. A transcription is very basic. But there is a lot of literature on how to transcribe, oral audio, auditory content, how you transcribe, paralinguistic features, etc. And it's not so straightforward. And sorry.
I didn't mean paralinguistic things. Just the words that people were using.
Yeah, I understood you, but I say that what you're saying is really relevant, but still we can take even another step. So with all this data, there is a lot of things that can be done. You can move to linguistic analysis, or even, I don't know, again, I have not prepared for that, but there is all these multimodal corpus analysis tools, ELAN, for instance, or Esmeralda. I used ELAN, E-L-A-N, for one of the projects. And then it's really interesting because you can there have the videos, of course, in case you are allowed to have the videos, and you can have different layers of analysis. Okay, so for instance, in the View project, Visuals into Word, we use that. And it's really powerful because there, for instance, you can not only analyze the written text, what is said, so to speak, but also facial expressions, gestures, etc. And this is way beyond what we are saying, but it's just to see all the potential that all those research has.
Yeah, and great work. So,
Thank you.
Just this comment.
Any other comments or suggestions or experiences from anyone? I see Irene Hermosa. Irene. Hello.
Hi.
Nice to see all these faces.
I have a question regarding the analysis of qualitative data. So after in Atlas T or any other of the software, how do you deal with ambiguous codes? I mean, sometimes it's crystal clear, but some other times there are codes that are close together. For example, I'm having trouble differentiating acting from kinesics or something like that. So codes that are related or close, just like that. How do you deal with that? Do you reach a conclusion with the whole team, or?
I will tell you what we are gonna do, but we are starting now, okay? We are just having the meetings to plan that. What we said is we are gonna start from this list of codes. For all the codes, there is a definition, and both the codes and the definition are uploaded in the software. Then if one of the team, then we'll do all one interview, to make sure that everything works. If while doing this interview, we come up with another, that we need another code, we'll put one specific code that we've agreed to, and then we'll have this discussion, okay? And we'll see if these codes work or don't work. So hopefully, after one pilot, we'll have one set of codes that work. But then still, if something doesn't quite work, you have the possibility in Atlasti to add comments. So if you are not quite sure about something, you can add a comment so that the other ones know. And there is also these memos at the end in which we discussed. That said, if two codes are too close, maybe worth considering at the beginning to merge them or to change the definitions, because this is going to give you problems all through the process. But again, that's my experience. I'm happy to learn about other experiences.
Thank
I
you.
don't have any other questions. I don't see any hands raised. Okay, then maybe, since I have about 25 minutes, 30 minutes, I can very briefly refer to a couple of projects, what we did. Those are two complementary examples. 5 slides per project for 5 slides. It's not going to take me long, but just to show you how we integrated focus groups and in some cases interviews. So IMAC is a project it's finished already. We wanted to know how access services, so subtitling, audio descriptions, and language interpreting, could be integrated in 360 videos. 360 videos are those videos, you know, all around you. Okay. Oh, sorry, this keeps falling. This keeps falling. Sorry. Where are you going to put the subtitles in a sphere in a 360 video? How are you going to? What are you going to audio describe? What features will the audio description have? Where are you going to put the sign language interpreting? What features should this window have? There were many questions. So what we decided to do, and also not only this, but how are these services going to be produced? So how are you going to create subtitles in 360 if you're a subtitler? How are you going to create audio descriptions, etc.? So in IMAC, we took a user-centric approach. And what we did is, first of all, we did focus groups in which we asked about the user needs and requirements. Then the technicians implemented the solutions. And then we tested these solutions, the prototype, with users, asking them about usability. In this case, we used SUS, asking them open questions about preferences, the questionnaires, and also asking presence, you know, the sense of presence or immersion using a standardized questionnaire, in this case, IPQ. And this is why, well, this is how we ended up discussing with them different types of subtitles, no, on a fixed position, left top, always visible, attached to the speaker, where we were testing guiding mechanisms such as arrows, top right, or radar. Types of audio descriptions. So, for instance, I hope you can still hear me because it says that the internet connection is stable. Okay, I'll keep going. We tested and discussed with them different ways of producing audio description. We started playing around with sound. So we had this idea of testing a sound which is all above you, a sound which is like following you, or a sound which comes from where the action is taking place, what we call classic, static, and dynamic audio description sound features. It didn't quite work. And then we tested different scripting styles, a more classical style, a more radio dynamic, lively style, and what we called an extended audio description style, in which, for instance, there is a hot spot and you get more information. But all this, which I explained in 1 minute, it would merit a whole talk. What I'm trying to say is that all this came from ideas from the participants that then were tested. And if it worked, fair enough. If it didn't, then we tested something different, okay? We also tested editors. So we had focus group with professionals who made suggestions. These suggestions were implemented, and then we tested the editors with them for usability and also open questions. And we also tested the player. Of course, we are talking about accessible content that is produced using editors. And then we are talking about the access services at the end, what the users want in terms of subtitles or the descriptions, etc. But there is something in between that we need, which is the player. If we don't have a player, they will not have access to the content. So we also we got feedbacks through user focus groups, and then we did some usability testing with users on the player features and how to make it easier to use. So this is a second example I wanted to present. And a last example that I will be presenting, is about the EASY project. For those of you who are not familiar with the EASY project, it's an educational project, an Erasmus Plus, in which we try to merge the concept of easy to understand language, be it easy to read or plain language, these simplified languages, with audiovisual access services. Moderator, Bernabé, etc. We're working on this. And our idea was, can we create easy to understand subtitles? Can we create easy to understand audio description? Can we create easy to understand audiovisual content? So this was new. I mean, easy to read exists, plain language exists, but merging these two things was the innovative thing. So how do we know that this is feasible? How do we approach this project? Especially because this project is an educational one. It's about generating or creating new professional profiles and creating training materials. So what we've done in the project is, first of all, we've done a survey across Europe to know how training in easy to understand language and practice is done across Europe. And we've got the results on our webpage. You can check that. Then, and this is where you see how we integrated focus groups and interview. There, what we did is do a series of focus groups and a series of interviews with professionals from easy to understand language and professionals from the audiovisual translation, so subtitling, audio description, etc., asking them if they thought this would be feasible, this merging, how they would do it, etc. So for that, of course, we had to plan, the focus groups and interviews, design a schedule across countries, carry out the focus groups, and do a procedure very similar to what I have explained you about the traction project. After that, we came up with a series of recommendations, and we started the third phase, which was developing the skills card. What is a skills card? It's basically a list of learning outcomes, a list of things the professional needs to know. And what professional? In this case, we talk about the professional in easy to understand subtitles. Then we designed one for the professional in easy to understand audio description, and one for the professional in easy to understand audiovisual journalism. So the third step in the project was to create this skills card. Then we generated a curriculum proposal. In this case, we created a proposal for a university course, 30 ECTS, so it would be like a semester. And we also designed a proposal for a MOOC. And right now we are finalizing all these training materials that will be available at the end of the month or in August. The project finishes in August, online, which you will be able to access if you want to learn more about this, okay? And the last step of the project has also been thinking how all this could be designed in a way that in the future can be certified, okay? So when we designed the skills cards or when we designed the curriculum, we took into account regulations or quality recommendations so that in the end could be certified. Okay, this is a broad overview of the project, but what interests you for this talk is you see how within this broad context, at one moment we went and talked to the users, and focus groups and interviews were a good method. So globally speaking, you see different projects in which we have used focus groups and interviews. I'm not an expert in focus groups and interviews. I've tried to share my experience with this. So any advice from anyone in the audience will be welcome. My recommendations would be plan your evaluation very well. What is your aim and what is your research question? Is it what you want to do? Is it the best? Are you choosing the best method or methods for what you aim to do? And of course, to do that, you need to have done your lit review. You need to have read a lot what's out there, you know, to see how your research builds on previous research. Design a plan, and then you design an evaluation plan, a research project with very clear steps. Of course, you will need to adapt, but you need a clear plan of action. Once you've designed, for instance, a focus group, an interview, a questionnaire, whatever, always pilot it, make sure it works, and improve it if necessary. You do the evaluation, you analyze it using the tools that are going to be useful for you. Okay, so you choose the best tools. And then I think it's important to communicate it. On the one hand, you need to communicate it to the scientific community. Of course, you need to publish papers. If it's a PhD, you will publish your PhD, but you need to write papers. You need to write articles to communicate the results and see how they relate, how they relate to existing research and how they contribute. And also you need to communicate it to society. So I would also advise, you know, to publish it in an easy to understand format so that everybody can know about what we are doing in academia. And I think it's very important to go back to your users, to your participants, not just, you know, have them in the focus groups and interviews, but go also back to them. And all this is a time-consuming process. So make sure you have time for this, okay? This type of research is really time-consuming, doing the interviews, transcribing them, analyzing them. So take your time and plan ahead. This was pretty much what I wanted to tell you. Just maybe to conclude, and this has nothing to do with what I've been talking to you about, but I think it's highly relevant. I would invite all of you, probably many of you already know about it. Irene, who talked before, is coordinating, you know, the data entry also. So here in the media accessibility platform, I would advise all of you to visit the MAP, Media Accessibility Platform, mapaccess.org. And on this, the URL is mapaccess, as I said, .org. And here you will have access to, a list of projects about media accessibility, to news, to events, to list of training courses, and also to publications. So if you are interested in a specific topic, you may want to do a keyword search and find bibliography. And at the bottom of the page where it says Accessometer, you can also access information about accessibility across the world. And this Accessometer is based on the legislation, the standards, and the guidelines associated to different countries. So this is done by, this was actually initiated by Pilar Orero, Jean Maria Greco, Pablo Romero Fresco, and I. It's now linked also to the LITMI, Cost Action, to the ALMA network, but it's possible because there is a wide range of contributors, past contributors and current contributors that input data, and some colleagues who validate them. So I think it's a good resource, but it can even be better if you or your team want to input data about what you're doing, about your research. So if you are interested, please contact me and we'll find a way so that you can start contributing. And that's pretty much what I wanted to talk to you about. So I'll stop sharing my screen so that I can see some faces, hopefully, because talking for 2 hours with no reaction, I don't know if you are still there, if you are bored and not listening anymore, But yeah, I see now a couple of faces, smiling one. Oh, someone is there. Anyway, that was my presentation. I think we still have some time for questions. So I'm trying to